Once there was a very kind emperor known throughout the lands for his great love of animals, and especially his fondness for dogs. The emperor's palace was overflowing with hundreds of dogs of all sizes and colors, always searching for the perfect dog. The emperor had gathered an impressive collection that included dogs of all kinds, from the most common village dog to dogs of superb breeding, the most well-trained and the finest pedigree. Still, the emperor was always on the hunt for something better. The emperor proudly hosted dog shows and competitions daily to show off his dogs. Herding competitions, dog races, high-diving events, and agility demonstrations were held. Every day, dogs could be seen practicing their high jumps and acrobatic acts, and many people would travel from the farthest reaches of the empire just to see them. The emperor loved an audience and allowed his subjects to enjoy the many gardens and expansive lawns of the palace whenever they came to see the dogs. Visitors were encouraged to bring their own dogs to compete against the palace dogs and present the emperor with any dogs that could add to his collection. Everything was good and everyone was happy. That is, until one day, a stranger named Bankman came to town. On this day, the palace and the villages surrounding it were bustling with dignitaries and guests from all over the world who were to attend the international dog show hosted by the emperor the next day. Bankman slithered into the local pub and began talking loudly about a new kind of dog that not even the emperor had ever seen before. Bankman said he wondered if the emperor had even heard of this unique dog breed, as it comes from a little-known island just discovered. Bankman said this dog was so rare and required such special care and attention that he dared not show her to anyone except the emperor. He claimed he was there to make sure that their beloved emperor, the one person who everyone knows is the most knowledgeable about dogs, the one man whose name is synonymous with dog, the most caring and intuitive and richest man in the empire, should be the first to have the opportunity to acquire the most extraordinary dog to be introduced to the world since, well, forever. After several goblets of ale, Bankman oozed over to the palace and knocked on the oversized doors to request an audience with the emperor. Although the emperor was very busy preparing for the international dog show he would host the next day, the words of Bankman had preceded him, and he was granted an audience with the emperor. The emperor's courtiers were also interested and assembled themselves in the imperial court to see this, the world's most special dog. Bankman strode into the room, tall but pudgy, confident but sloppy. With one hand, he pulled an ornate wagon behind him that appeared to have a cage covered in a red velvet blanket on the bed. When he reached the center of the court, he stopped and bowed low. And upon receiving permission to rise, he stood and addressed the emperor. Bankman's words spun a web of mystery and rarity. He told a story of an adventurer whose impressive abilities were like no other, who, upon hearing of the most exclusive canine in existence, knew he had to acquire this dog for his emperor, the most deserving of all the people in the world of dog owners. Bankman continued that everyone knew the emperor's knowledge of dogs was vast and legendary, and so naturally he was the most worthy, and in fact, the only qualified person to introduce this important new discovery of this particular breed of dog, never before seen by the civilized world. The emperor, impressed with the astuteness of the stranger, agreed wholeheartedly with his observations and granted Bankman permission to continue. Bankman circled the wagon and spoke directly to the emperor, ignoring the others. He reiterated how rare, new, and never seen before this dog is, how it comes from an island recently discovered, and how the emperor will be the first outside of this recently discovered island to own one of these dogs. He spoke about the significant attributes of the dog, how this dog is indisputably the most beautiful, more beautiful than any other dog has ever been. Her coat consists of the finest, silkiest fur that never needs brushing and never has a strand out of place. A luminosity of an indescribable color emanating from each hair makes the dog appear to blend in with its surroundings, making it seem nearly invisible in a particular light. This dog is so soft, light, and airy, only the most sensitive can feel the touch of her coat. These dogs are so well behaved, they never bark. In fact, This dog breed is so extraordinary, so scarce, so singular in existence, only those who are the most educated in the subject of dogs, people who are the most refined in taste, the most clever in thinking, and genuinely humble people will be able to appreciate this dog." Bankman stepped closer to the Emperor and lowered his voice. He tells the Emperor that when he first set out with the dog on his journey to the palace, he showed her to some people along the way and discovered that not everyone could see her. Bankman observed that ignorant or cruel people could not perceive the dog's beauty. Contrarily, intelligent, kind people with much knowledge about dogs appreciate it much. Many people had offered to give Bankman great amounts of money to acquire the dog from him, but Bankman said his mission was to get this dog to his Emperor and turn them all down. The Emperor is intrigued. He feels he is indeed the most educated in the subject of dogs, the most refined in taste, the most clever in thinking, and undeniably humble. Surely he will be able to perceive its existence. The Emperor imagines the gasps and the oohs and ahs from the audience when he introduces the dog the next day at the International Dog Show. He will make it the pinnacle event of the day and dreamed of how envious the other rulers would be when he received a standing ovation and flowers were thrown at his feet. He fantasized about making an everlasting impression on the world. This would be his legacy. He would finally have his L. Excited, the Emperor told Bankman he was ready to see the dog. Bankman stood next to the blanket-covered cage. He lifted one corner, looked inside, and spoke, though his words could not be heard. Bankman then stood to the wagon's side and slowly slid the red velvet blanket off, revealing an ornately carved wooden cage embellished with a beautiful inlaid mother-of-pearl pattern, but clearly empty. Bankman exclaimed, "I present to you, Your Highness, the trained dog." The courtiers gasped, fell silent, and waited to see what the Emperor would do next. For a second, the Emperor was unsure of what to say. Bankman had said only the cleverest, kindest, most humble people in all the land appreciate the dog, and the Emperor felt he was unquestionably the humblest and kindest. Others may be smarter, but he was sure it was only by a little. He stood, walked over to Bankman, and said, "I would like to pet this dog." Bankman, ecstatic, agreed, stating that it was a fantastic idea. He went through many exaggerated and animated movements, removing the dog from the cage, then demonstrated petting the dog. He placed his hand on the invisible head of the dog, pretended to pat it, then stroked her invisible back. He smiled and said, "It's so soft, Your Highness," then stepped back with a bow and a flourish implying the Emperor should try it. The Emperor tentatively reached his hand out and patted the air in the same spot Bankman had. He stopped and looked at Bankman, who smiled and nodded approvingly. The Emperor moved his hand and began petting the invisible dog. He smiled and commented that he'd never felt anything like it. It, indeed, was the softest dog he'd ever pet in his entire life. "Isn't she beautiful?" the Emperor turned and asked his courtiers. They murmured, "Oh, yes, gorgeous. Beautiful." They chattered about how the Emperor was so fortunate to have been able to be the first to acquire this, the rarest of dogs. He will surely be the most talked about leader at the International Dog Show and win the Best in Show trophy again this year. The Emperor told his treasurer to pay Bankman. He ordered the dog to be housed in the finest chambers and fed the best meal this evening in preparation for tomorrow's show. By the next day at sun-up, the palace was teeming with people and dogs in preparation for the big day. The International Dog Show is the biggest event of the year, bringing many people from great distances to the palace and surrounding villages. All the streets are filled with musicians and vendors selling food and ale. People of all ages are dancing and singing, enjoying general merriment in anticipation of seeing the Emperor's latest addition to his collection, the trained dog. And so that afternoon, at the peak of the celebration, everyone crowded into the arena for the big presentation. Excitement rose as the Emperor entered with his procession of dogs and one special cage on a wagon covered by a red velvet blanket. Once the Emperor had found his place, the crowd grew quiet. Then, after loudly clearing his throat first, the Emperor announced that he had invented a new dog, and said soon everyone would want a perfect trained dog like his. "I know the smartest dogs in the world. I know the good ones, I know the bad ones, I know the overrated ones. You got a lot of them that are overrated. They're not good, they think they are. They get good stories, 'cause the newspapers get buffaloed. But they're not good. But I know the best dogs in the world. I'd put them one for each country. Believe me, folks, we do very well. The Emperor continued. There has never been anything like it. This great movement of trained dogs, never been anything like it. And perhaps there will never be anything like it again, he said. The audience politely applauded while the Emperor removed the red velvet blanket. A gasp from the crowd was followed by an awkward silence. No one wanted to contradict the Emperor and his courtiers, but no one could see the dog. Visiting dignitary King Jamari leaned over to the Duke of Atozi and said he hoped Bankman would sell him a trained army, too. Prince Marky overheard the comment and, throwing his head back in laughter, ran from the arena due to second-hand embarrassment. But upon hearing the laughter, the crowd realized this must be a joke and began laughing too. The Emperor stood still as a statue under the hot lights. His eyes darted to the private box seats arranged for Bankman to enjoy the festivities. They were empty, and the Emperor instantly realized he'd been made a fool. Feeling embarrassed by the crowd and angry with his courtiers for being such yes-men, the Emperor smiled and turned round so all could see he was laughing too. Then, with the spotlight still on him, the Emperor stretched his arms out, took a bow, and left the circle, pretending that he meant to do that. The Emperor felt shame and was angry that he was fooled. He's ashamed that he'd been too obsessed with finding the perfect dog and too proud to see the truth right before him. He orders Bankman to be captured and punished for this deception. Bankman, who'd already spent the equivalent of $8 billion by the time he was caught, was given a luxurious private island with strict instructions never to leave it and to never speak of the deception. The Emperor's courtiers were scolded but allowed to keep their pensions, homes, and high government appointments. At this point in the story, we would like to say it becomes evident to the Emperor that it is the love and companionship of his imperfect dogs that genuinely matters, and that he resolves to appreciate and care for his dogs as they are, rather than chase an impossible ideal. But he doesn't. The Emperor returns to his palace, humbled but no wiser. He embraces his dogs and the people who care for them. Still, he continues his quest for adoration, not realizing he already has all the love, loyalty, and companionship he seeks. And that is the story of how the Emperor got his L